Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Miller. I am a designer, researcher, and entrepreneur. Most recently, I co-founded a company called Level Therapy, where I was the CEO, former CEO. We were a 500 startups company, and we provided access to licensed psychotherapists and behavioral health professionals, as well as products for them to manage anxiety and depression. And so my team and I spent a lot of time thinking about how to design for the stigmatized community. And after this 2-year process of research and actually launching the product, we came up with a framework, and I want to share that with you today, which is really just an exploration in design thinking for not just designing solutions for a user, but actually designing for communities that are experiencing inherent problems or inherent experiences as part of using a particular service or product. And so today, I want to talk about this framework called RARE that that I've created. And so there are 4 steps, and really just talking about this framework and reframing the actual problem, architecting innovation, research, which I know that everyone in this room is familiar with, but I want to reiterate why it's important and different methods, as well as experience. And so not just designing potential solutions from behind a desk or in an ivory tower, but actually getting out and, if we can, ideally experiencing the problem that we're solving for, or designing solutions where we're including the community or the individuals that we're designing for as well. And so when I say reframe, I want to talk about the framing effect. And so the framing effect is an example of cognitive bias, in which people react differently depending on how something is presented to them. And so for my team and I, when we were designing Level Therapy, we spent a lot of time thinking about how we could reframe the problem, which is something that is really, really popular in psychology and psychiatry in general. But we wanted to try to inject that within the product. And so there are 3 major problems between, in the United States, 50 million Americans accessing treatment after they experience a diagnosable mental health disorder. And so the most prevalent is stigma, the second is cost, and the third is access. And so in designing a mobile solution, we knew that we could address access. We could put a therapist in everyone's pocket, right? That's pretty straightforward. By being a technology solution, we could easily address costs. We have less overhead, and so we could have cheaper prices or launch a subscription model. That was a pretty easy problem to solve. But how do you address stigma? How do you solve for stigma? How do you design for stigma? And so my team and I decided to ultimately just completely reframe the conversation and not use the words mental illness, not use the word stigma, but really focus on the entire brand, the copy, the entire color palettes, the entire experience, and then including a broad scope of users within our research when we were developing all those things I just mentioned. And that helped us create a product that was designed largely by our community, but we were able to still inject a little bit of modernity within the product and still push this type of industry forward. But today I want to talk about a really amazing example. I love Clue, and I love the founder of Clue. If you're not familiar, Clue is a period and ovulation tracker. The team is based out of Berlin. And what I love most about Clue is their CEO does not talk about Clue in relation to period or ovulation tracking. It's completely talked about as a broader healthcare problem and solution. And so she and her team have reframed Clue as a tool to help women know what's going on in their bodies, and to empower and be powered by that knowledge. And so this reframing effect allows the Clue team and the product to be addressable to a much broader population than just women. And so now families, partners are included within the application, and they can be a part of this solution in managing the reproductive health care of women. And so for each of these, I want to share a couple of methods that my team and I used while we were coming up with this framework and while we were reframing Level Therapy. And so the first that I want to talk about particularly that's appropriate for addressing this reframing effect is perceptual maps. And so perceptual maps, this is an important workshop exercise where should use this exercise to collect data about user perceptions of varying products and services. Second is online ethnography. And so this is a really, really amazing experience, or excuse me, exercise to collect qualitative data from any online platform and community. Right, and so if you're going out and collecting an aggregate sentiment about a particular product or an aggregate sentiment from a particular community, you'll be in a really, really strong position to start to design products that actually address their needs. And lastly, designing by metaphor. This is a really, really amazing exercise to explore the idea or problem through the application of different metaphors. And so why I like this exercise the most is it really forces the design teams or the founding teams to really think about problems and solutions in analogous ways, and not really think about just providing access to solutions that potentially competitors have launched, but really thinking about the problem and solution in a fresh way. Next is architecture innovation. So architecture innovation is innovation that comes about by reassembling existing components of a system. And the most prevalent example that I can really think of is the iPhone. And I'm not suggesting that iPhone users or even Nokia users are a stigmatized community in any way. But I do want to share this example because it is a really, really amazing example to show the power of architecture innovation. And so before the iPhone launched in 2007, Nokia was by far the market leader. And arguably, the iPhone, when it launched, had all the same components that all Nokia phones had previously. But they had one amazing difference, and it was that the entire experience, the entire hardware components as well, were designed from the ground up, with the user at the center of that experience. And so this architecture innovation allowed Apple to very, very quickly gain market penetration and ultimately end up winning. But this was a Forbes cover in November of 2007. The iPhone launched in June or July of 2007, I believe. And we all know how this story ended. But you see the power of architecture innovation can take down massive Goliaths in the industry. And a couple of methods that I want to share for architecture innovation. The first is a co-design workshop. And so this is an amazing exercise to include and make sure that when people are designing, that the people that you're designing for are the center of the process. And so as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is something that my team and I focused on heavily. And so we made sure that we included individuals that let us know that they had experienced diagnosable mental health disorders, but also individuals that were the furthest from that particular persona, as well as individuals that had high design aesthetics, as well as a lot of developers as well. And so allowing us to do this, or doing this allowed us to create an actual product that really, really addressed a lot of different individuals within this community. Second is direct experience storyboards. And so you should use this exercise to create a photo narrative of using a product or service when involving users is not possible. And so we know that in a global economy, we can't actually get in front and talk to all of our users directly. But this is a great way to actually storyboard potential experiences of individuals that we can't get in touch with. And video prototyping. Similar to designing by metaphor, this is another way to test an idea through a different application. And so video prototyping is a great way to, again, try to be creative in the problems and solutions that we're actually designing for. So next is research. And so I know everyone in here knows the importance of user research. But I really want to really spend some time talking about this because it's something that I see a lot of teams still neglecting or still just approaching as if it's a checkbox. So when I say research, I'm talking about rigorously testing all of our assumptions when we're designing products, and testing those assumptions consistently as either the community or the product changes, which is something that is really inherent to companies that have already scaled. And right when you're starting a company and you're a young startup, this may not be really addressable because you have limited resources, right? But if you're not and you have the resources, whether that's time or people, it's really imperative to spend some time thinking about this. And so here's an example of some user research that we conducted with Level Therapy. And so we used a really amazing service called Lookback. And so Lookback is a product that allows users to go through any design flow on mobile, and the front camera is activated, but the light isn't on, so the actual user does not know, well, they forget that it's on. We let them know that obviously they're being recorded. And so what we did was use Lookback to allow potential users to go through early flows and ask them to talk through what they were thinking when they were looking at each of the designs. And so when we had a really broad representation of potential users and using a service like Lookback, this allowed us to get not just quantitative, but qualitative data at the same time from a broad distribution of potential people, which is extremely beneficial for us for designing potential products and testing out different UI flows or UX flows. Here are some methods to allow you to think about research in some different ways. My favorite here is the Think Aloud protocol, which I just mentioned. And why I think it's most effective is because there's one input, it's just Lookback, but you're getting the data and the insights in a qualitative sense, but also a quantitative sense. Lastly, I want to talk about experience. And so as I mentioned a little bit earlier, too often we try to design solutions from behind a computer, behind a desk. And I really want to nail home the fact and the importance, really, as a design community and developers as well, to get out from behind our computers and start talking to the individuals that we're designing for. For stigmatized communities particularly, this is extremely important, right? And so when we're thinking about mental health, potentially getting any potential UX or UI flow wrong could be life-threatening. And so if you're operating within healthcare, this is not an option. And so for us, we spent a lot of time thinking about these potential solutions, not just from the consumer side, but also from the therapist side. And so an example of this is a reproductive health application that I'm currently working on for a client. And so this is an exploration in using active redundancy within a community or a social network to be able to use the experience of other people to decrease the amount of stress and misinformation within that particular community. So what I mean by that is that I know that I do not understand the problems of women when they're trying to address reproductive health issues, so whether that's finding clinics, et cetera. But I do know that I can connect other women with each other, and they can potentially help each other talking about their own experiences or sharing information regarding access to clinics, et cetera. And so what I've done is create not just a social network for women to connect with one another to reduce, again, the stress and misinformation within reproductive health in America, but also provide quick access to clinics via text and video so that they can actually move forward in the process of finding a clinic or getting their questions answered if they want to. And lastly, here are some methods to help think about creating amazing experiences and user experience within the design thinking process. And one of these that we use a lot in my last company is the autobiographical diaries. And so this is a great exercise to document your experience while using your prototype or product twice a day for 5 days. Right, and so this is just an exercise, a high-frequency exercise, to use the same product and try to use that product in different use cases with over a week. And so why this is important is that it allows us to try to explore potential opportunities that exist on the fringes of the particular problem that we're solving. And for stigmatized communities, this is extremely important. And so typically you know the absolute root of the problem that you're trying to solve, but often you don't know what triggers may be leading to that root. And so this is an exercise to try to identify those triggers and try to design solutions for them. Thank you. I would love to hear feedback, or if anyone has any questions or is looking for any of the methods, I can definitely send them to you. My contact info is in the bottom right. I think we're doing questions, if anyone has any. Yeah.
Hi. So how do you actually reach out to the people? Because it's not so easy to find those groups of people that you are focusing on.
Yeah, so great question. Using a lot of online tools is something that's worked really, really well for us. And so designing surveys and either using companies like SurveyMonkey to find particular individuals that are within your community, or going the lean route and really just designing a survey, running ads, and driving particular community towards a survey. But if you can't use online communities, try to use offline communities. That's something that's overlooked, obviously because we exist in the tech industry, but it still works.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yes?
Thank you. So a lot of the methods that you mentioned are generally research methods that are used in industry, right? So
Correct.
how do you use them differently when it comes to more stigmatized populations?
Yeah, so we don't really use them differently. It's more about finding the community and then using those methods to test within that community. Great. Thank you.